Over the next year, the Niagara Regional Police attempted to find any clues that would lead them to the teenager's killer. They called in FBI profiler Greg McCreary to assist with the investigation. McCreary had been asked to help with the Scarborough rapist case more than 2 years earlier. But he had no reason to believe those rapes were connected to the murder of Leslie Mahaffey. Nor did Toronto police make the connection to the rash of incidents in St. Catharines, so that information was not brought to McCreary's attention.
I wish I had made that connection. I had no idea there were other rapes going on up there at the time either. Had I known that, I don't know, maybe that would have clicked for me.
While the Niagara Regional Police searched for Leslie's murderer, Carla Homolka settled into her role as a wife. But she soon found that marriage had not quenched her new husband's thirst for virgins. In fact, Paul's deviant sexual demands escalated.
After they were married, Paul demanded that Carla get some of her sister, Tammy's best friends, around to the house because he wanted to drug them in the same way that they drugged Tammy.
Over the next year, Carla enticed several young girls into their home. The newlyweds drugged and sexually assaulted them. But unlike Carla's sister, Tammy, these girls survived, regaining consciousness with no memory of the assaults. Some of the attacks were videotaped.
He was obsessed with making himself into a star. It was very important for him to keep trophies or mementos that would confirm how successful he had been on these occasions.
With Carla's knowledge, Paul continued to stalk women throughout the Niagara region. On the 16th of April 1992, Paul and Carla went for an afternoon drive with the intent of bringing home a new sex slave. They were only a few miles from their own house when they spotted 15-year-old Kristen French walking home from school. They pulled into a church car park and waited for the girl to pass.
Carla was sitting in the passenger seat of Paul's Nissan, and she said to Kristen French, "Excuse me, could you help us with directions?" And she had a map out, and poor Kristen had no idea what was about to happen to her.
The couple shoved Kristen into their car and drove the short distance back to their Port Dalhousie home. It wasn't long before Kristen French was reported missing. Local police began to investigate.
We have no doubt from eyewitnesses that Kristen was abducted from that parking lot.
Witnesses told police they'd seen the girl with 2 people in the church car park. They also reported seeing the 3 drive away in a beige Camaro. In response to public fear about an attacker on the prowl, the Niagara Regional Police put together a team of investigators called the Green Ribbon Task Force. They examined eyewitness accounts about a beige Camaro and contacted Special Agent Greg McCreary.
It was a big hunt for this beige Camaro. Eyewitnesses were rock solid about seeing this beige Camaro.
Police did not know at the time that this was a false lead. Paul Bernardo drove a gold Nissan.
It's always a dilemma for law enforcement because we know eyewitness identification. It's been shown time and time again to be faulty. But you've got people witnessing the abduction and describing the car. You've got to go look for that car.
The media began to link the disappearance of Kristen French to that of Leslie Mahaffey 1 year earlier.
I'd been a reporter for maybe 15 years at the time, and all of my instinct, all of my experience told me that this was really bad, that this was going to be a major, major story.
Kristen's father appeared at a press conference, offering words of hope to his only daughter, should she be watching.
We want to know that we are thinking of you and that everything can be done is being done. And we'll get you back real quick.
Greg McCreary developed a profile of the suspect.
I described him as being a white male in his late 20s, probably with a history of sexually violent crimes, a history of domestic violence. He would beat his domestic partners.
Based on eyewitness reports that there were 2 offenders, McCreary hoped that he could get through to one of them.
If we can drive a wedge in between them, is likely to be a falling out, and we would like to very much be able to facilitate that.
Paul and Carla kept Kristen French for several days, raping and beating her. They videotaped the assaults to add to their collection. Finally, they strangled her. On the 30th of April, 1992, Kristen's body was found. Paul Bernardo had left the body of the St. Catherine's teenager more than 30 miles away, in the neighbouring town of Burlington. Her body was discovered in a ditch near the cemetery where Leslie Mahaffey was buried. The authorities attempted to link the two cases, while local media fed the public's hunger.
I mean, we covered it extensively, probably more than any other paper, but there was an audience and an appetite for that.
As the hunt for a possible serial killer monopolized the news, Paul and Carla's relationship became even more violent. In January 1993, Paul beat Carla so severely that she sought treatment in an emergency room. Around the same time, the DNA samples collected more than 2 years earlier in the Scarborough rapist case were finally processed. After sorting through hundreds of samples, Paul Bernardo was identified as the man responsible for the Scarborough rapes. He was now living 18 miles away in Port Dalhousie, where Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey had been murdered.
That was a moment where I was both excited and frustrated. They had identified Paul Bernardo now as being the Scarborough rapist, and then he had moved into this area and became prime suspect, I mean #1 suspect in this case.
Bernardo had originally been identified and questioned based on a composite sketch of the Scarborough rapist more than 2 years earlier. At that time, he'd also given a DNA sample.
I think he was more brazen and more aggressive than ever, thinking that for whatever reason he'd beaten the system.
After investigators connected the cases, reporter Alan Cairns got the police tip of a lifetime.
The guy said, pull your Scarborough rapist files. And I remember, no, it's the Kristen French murder. And Leslie Mahaffey murder, he said, pull your Scarborough rapist guy files. It's the same guy. And I was stunned. Huge, huge story.
January 1993, Port Dalhousie, Ontario. Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka had a violent fight, landing her in hospital with severe injuries. Paul had attacked Carla with a torch, leaving her with 2 black eyes, a broken rib, and severe bruising. After less than 2 years of marriage, she decided to move out. Around the same time, Toronto police contacted Carla to discuss the DNA results of the Scarborough rapist case. After more than a 2-year delay, officials had identified her husband, Paul Bernardo, as the Scarborough rapist. Police suspected there might be some connection to the murders of Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey, but had few leads. To question Carla, they brought along members of the Green Ribbon Task Force, the team investigating the murders of the girls.
She thought to interview her about the domestic assault. In my opinion, they handled that interview exactly right, because they didn't accuse her, they didn't overstep the bounds, but just by having Green Ribbon Task Force investigators there, that message was being communicated to her.
After her interview with the authorities, Carla broke down and confessed everything to her family. She was afraid the police already knew or were close to discovering the couple's terrible crimes. On her parents' advice, Carla hired a lawyer and told him that Paul was the Scarborough rapist. She also admitted to their being involved in the deaths of Leslie Mahaffey, Kristen French, and her own sister, Tammy Homolka. Carla now held the key to putting away one of Canada's most notorious serial rapists and killers. But she would only agree to testify against her husband in exchange for a reduced sentence for herself.
Her attorney began to cut a deal, and that, of course, was of tremendous interest, to all the investigators. being able to shed some direct light on these murders and what was going on.
Carla made a full confession to the police. She confirmed that Paul was the Scarborough rapist and blamed him for the deaths of the 3 girls.